The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Staff Sergeant Michael Harrison adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what he knew would be the most important escort duty of his career. The red tunic and bearskin hat of the Queen's Guard felt heavier than usual, not from their physical weight, but from the responsibility that lay ahead. Today he would accompany Private James Thompson on his final journey home. James had been only 19 when he enlisted, full of dreams and determination to serve his country. Michael remembered the young soldier's infectious smile and his habit of writing letters to his mother every Sunday without fail. They had served together in Afghanistan, where James had shown remarkable courage during a rescue mission that saved 3 fellow soldiers. But fate had other plans, and an improvised explosive device had claimed James's life during what should have been a routine patrol. The fallen soldier's family had specifically requested that a member of the Queen's Guard escort their son home. Knowing how proud James had been of the regiment's traditions, Michael felt honored to fulfill this sacred duty, understanding that he wasn't just transporting remains but carrying the hopes, dreams, and sacrifices of a young man who had given everything for his country. As Michael stood beside the flag-draped casket in the cargo area of the military transport plane, he reflected on the conversations he'd had with James about home. The young soldier had often spoken about the small town where he grew up, about Friday night football games, his mother's apple pie, and his dream of one day opening a garage with his father. Now, Michael would ensure that James returned to that same town with the honor and dignity he deserved. The flight from the military base to the civilian airport would take 3 hours. During that time, Michael maintained his vigilant watch, standing at attention despite the plane's movements. He thought about James's mother, who had broken down in tears when informed of her son's death, and his father, a quiet man who had served in the military himself decades earlier. They were waiting at the airport, along with the entire community, to welcome their hero home. Military protocol dictated every aspect of the transfer process, from the specific way the casket should be handled to the precise timing of each movement. Michael had rehearsed these procedures countless times, but today felt different. This wasn't a drill or ceremony. This was about bringing a brother home to his family, and every detail mattered more than ever before. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their approach to the destination airport. Michael straightened his shoulders and checked his uniform one final time. Soon they would land, and the next phase of this solemn journey would begin. He knew that hundreds of people would be waiting at the airport, from family members to local veterans, all gathered to pay their respects to a young man who had made the ultimate sacrifice. As the plane began its descent, Michael placed his gloved hand on the casket and whispered a quiet promise. He would ensure that Private James Thompson received every honor due to a fallen hero, and that his family would see their son treated with the respect and dignity that his service had earned. Nothing would prevent him from fulfilling this sacred duty, no matter what challenges might arise once they landed. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump, and Michael felt the weight of responsibility settle even more heavily on his shoulders. The real test of his commitment was about to begin, and he was determined to honor both his fallen comrade and the uniform he wore with unwavering dedication and professionalism. The aircraft came to a complete stop on the tarmac, and Michael could see through the small window that a crowd had already gathered near the terminal building. Flags flew at half-staff, and he noticed several news crews setting up their equipment to document the homecoming. The airport had clearly prepared for this moment, with barriers set up to create a respectful pathway for the casket's journey. As the cargo doors opened, Michael felt a rush of warm air enter the plane. The ground crew that approached wore solemn expressions, and he could see that several civilian airport workers had removed their hats as a sign of respect. The transfer process began with military precision, as Michael supervised every movement of the flag-draped casket from the aircraft to the waiting hearse. The honor guard that had assembled on the tarmac stood at perfect attention, their movements synchronized as they carried James's casket. Michael walked alongside, his ceremonial sword at his side, ensuring that every protocol was followed to the letter. The bagpipers who had volunteered their services began playing a haunting melody that echoed across the airport grounds, adding a deeply moving soundtrack to the ceremony. James's parents stood behind a rope barrier, his mother clutching a folded photograph of her son in his military uniform. Michael caught sight of them and felt his throat tighten with emotion. but he maintained his composure, knowing that his professional bearing was part of the honor being paid to their son. The father, a graying man with weathered hands, stood ramrod straight, his own military training evident in his posture. As they approached the terminal building, Michael noticed something that made him pause. An airport security supervisor was speaking animatedly with one of the airport officials, gesturing toward the honor guard procession. The man appeared agitated, checking his watch repeatedly and pointing toward the terminal entrance. Michael sensed that something was amiss but continued with the ceremony, trusting that any issues would be resolved appropriately. The casket was carefully loaded onto a wheeled platform that would transport it through the airport to the main terminal, where the family would hold a brief receiving ceremony before the final journey to the funeral home. This route had been carefully planned and coordinated weeks in advance, with airport management providing full cooperation for the solemn occasion. However, as they approached the terminal's service entrance, the same security supervisor who had been gesturing earlier stepped forward, blocking their path. He held up his hand and began speaking to the lead airport coordinator, his voice rising with each word. Michael couldn't hear the exact conversation, but the supervisor's body language suggested he was objecting to something about their planned route. The airport coordinator looked flustered and kept glancing between the security supervisor and the approaching honor guard. Michael could see James's family in the background, their faces filled with confusion and concern as they watched the unfolding situation. The crowd of supporters who had gathered to pay their respects began murmuring among themselves, sensing that something was wrong. Michael's training had prepared him for many scenarios, but interference with a military funeral procession was not something he had anticipated. He maintained his position beside the casket while the airport officials continued their heated discussion, but he could feel his jaw tightening with controlled frustration. This was not the time or place for bureaucratic complications. The security supervisor pulled out his radio and began speaking rapidly into it, apparently calling for backup or clarification from his superiors. Meanwhile, the honor guard stood frozen in place, unsure whether to proceed or wait for the situation to be resolved. The bagpipers had stopped playing, and an uncomfortable silence settled over the gathered crowd. Michael stepped forward with measured authority, his ceremonial uniform commanding immediate attention from everyone present. His voice, trained through years of military service, cut through the tension with clear, unwavering purpose. He identified himself to the security supervisor and calmly inquired about the nature of the delay, though his steel blue eyes made it clear that he expected a swift resolution. The security supervisor, a middle-aged man named Robert Collins, explained that new airport regulations required all ceremonial processions to undergo additional security screening, regardless of their military nature. He claimed that the casket and honor guard would need to pass through standard security checkpoints, including metal detectors and bag searches, before proceeding to the terminal's main area. Michael felt his blood pressure rising but maintained his professional composure. He explained that this was a military funeral procession for a fallen soldier, not a standard passenger movement, and that extensive security clearances had already been obtained through proper military channels weeks in advance. The casket contained the remains of a hero who had died serving his country, and subjecting him to routine security procedures would be deeply disrespectful. Collins remained unmoved, insisting that airport policy superseded all other considerations and that no exceptions could be made, regardless of the circumstances. He stated that these procedures were necessary for the safety of all airport users and that emotional considerations could not override security protocols. His tone became increasingly bureaucratic and inflexible as he spoke. Behind the barrier, James's mother began crying softly as she watched the argument unfold. Her husband placed a protective arm around her shoulders while other family members gathered closer, their faces reflecting confusion and growing anger at the inexplicable delay. The crowd of supporters, which included several military veterans, began expressing their displeasure more vocally. Michael requested to speak with Collins's superior, but was informed that the security chief was in a meeting and could not be disturbed. The supervisor suggested that the entire procession could wait in a holding area until proper procedures could be followed, which might take several hours due to the current security screening backlog. The airport coordinator, caught between conflicting authorities, attempted to mediate by suggesting alternative routes through the terminal, but Collins rejected each proposal, citing various security concerns. Meanwhile, news crews began focusing their cameras on the standoff, sensing a developing story that would capture public attention. Several passengers who had been waiting in the terminal began gathering near the windows to observe the commotion. Many of them appeared sympathetic to the honor guard situation, with some taking photos and videos to share on social media. The story began spreading online within minutes, as people expressed outrage at the treatment of a fallen soldier's funeral procession. Local veterans in the crowd started making phone calls to their own military contacts, hoping to apply pressure through official channels to resolve the situation. The president of the local Veterans of Foreign Wars post approached Michael and offered to contact his congressman's office. But Michael knew that political intervention might take hours to materialize. As the standoff continued, Michael realized that this situation required more than military protocol or official procedures. He needed to find a way to honor his fallen comrade while navigating this unexpected bureaucratic obstacle. The weight of responsibility he felt toward James and his family had only intensified, and he was determined not to let red tape diminish the dignity of this solemn homecoming. The security supervisor checked his watch again and repeated his demands for compliance with standard procedures, seemingly oblivious to the growing crowd of angry observers and the emotional toll his inflexibility was taking on a grieving family. Michael knew that his next decision would determine whether Private James Thompson received the honor he deserved or became the victim of mindless bureaucracy. Michael made a decision that would define his character for years to come. Instead of engaging in further argument with the inflexible security supervisor, he turned his attention to the growing crowd of supporters and began speaking in a voice that carried across the tarmac. His words were not addressed to Collins or the airport officials, but to the people who had come to honor a fallen hero. He told them about Private James Thompson, about the young man who had written letters to his mother every Sunday, who had saved 3 fellow soldiers' lives, and who had died serving the country he loved. His voice carried the weight of personal knowledge and genuine emotion, painting a picture of heroism and sacrifice that resonated with everyone present. The crowd fell silent as they listened to stories about James's courage and character. As Michael spoke, something remarkable began happening. Airport employees who had been watching from various terminals started leaving their posts to join the gathering. Baggage handlers, ticket agents, maintenance workers, and flight attendants began appearing on the tarmac, drawn by the powerful testimony they could hear echoing through the terminal's public address system, which someone had connected to Michael's voice. Collins found himself increasingly isolated as his own colleagues began questioning the wisdom of his rigid interpretation of security protocols. Several senior airport officials, alerted by the growing commotion and the negative social media attention the airport was receiving, began making hurried phone calls to their superiors and legal departments. The breakthrough came when a retired Air Force colonel, who happened to be traveling through the airport that day, approached the security supervisor. Colonel Patricia Williams presented her military identification and calmly but firmly explained the legal precedents for military funeral processions and the federal regulations that superseded local airport policies in such circumstances. Williams had the authority and knowledge to cite specific federal statutes that protected military funeral proceedings, and she made it clear that the airport's interference could result in serious legal consequences. She also pointed out that the negative publicity already spreading across social media platforms could damage the airport's reputation far more than any perceived security risk. Meanwhile, the crowd had swelled to several hundred people, including passengers who had delayed their own travel plans to witness and support the ceremony. Local news crews were broadcasting the standoff live, and the hashtag honoring Private Thompson was trending on multiple social platforms, drawing national attention to the situation. Michael maintained his vigil beside James's casket throughout this entire ordeal, never leaving his post or allowing the bureaucratic interference to diminish his commitment to his fallen comrade. His unwavering dedication and dignified response to the crisis had transformed what could have been a public relations disaster into a powerful demonstration of military honor and community support. The pressure from multiple sources finally forced Collins to contact his superiors directly. During a tense phone conversation that several people could overhear, he was apparently given clear instructions to allow the procession to proceed immediately and without further interference. His face flushed with embarrassment as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. The airport coordinator quickly moved to implement the original ceremonial plan, directing ground crews to clear the designated pathway and ensure that no further obstacles would impede the honor guard's movement. Additional airport security personnel were assigned to facilitate rather than obstruct the procession, creating a protective corridor for the solemn ceremony. As preparations resumed for the final phase of the airport ceremony, Michael felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because he had won a bureaucratic battle, but because he had succeeded in maintaining the dignity and honor that James Thompson deserved. The young soldier's sacrifice would not be diminished by petty regulations or inflexible officials. The procession resumed with renewed purpose and dignity as hundreds of people lined the pathway through the terminal. Airport employees stood at attention alongside their workstations, many with tears in their eyes as the honor guard passed by. The bagpipers, who had remained ready despite the delay, began playing again, their haunting melody now carrying added emotional weight after the struggle they had all witnessed. Michael walked beside the casket with perfect military bearing, but internally he felt a profound connection to everyone present. The crisis had transformed what was meant to be a private ceremony into a public demonstration of respect and unity. Passengers delayed their travel plans to pay their respects, forming spontaneous honor lines throughout the terminal corridors. James's parents, who had watched the entire confrontation with growing distress, now walked behind the casket with expressions of pride mixed with grief. His mother approached Michael during a brief pause in the procession and whispered her thanks, not just for bringing her son home, but for fighting to ensure he received the honor he deserved. Her words strengthened Michael's resolve and validated every difficult moment of the past hour. The terminal's main reception area had been transformed into an impromptu memorial space. Airport maintenance crews had hastily arranged American flags around a designated area where the family could receive condolences from the community members who had gathered. Local florists had donated floral arrangements, and someone had created a photo display featuring pictures of James in uniform. As the honor guard carefully positioned the casket in the reception area, Michael noticed that Security Supervisor Collins had quietly approached the family. With obvious discomfort and genuine remorse, he offered a personal apology to James's parents for the delays and complications. His rigid interpretation of regulations had given way to human understanding of the situation's emotional significance. The brief receiving ceremony that followed was deeply moving. Community members, veterans, active-duty military personnel, and even complete strangers approached the family to express their condolences and share stories about how James's sacrifice had touched their lives. Several people mentioned that they had learned about the situation through social media and had driven to the airport specifically to pay their respects. A group of local high school students, led by their ROTC instructor, presented the family with a handmade tribute they had created during the delay. Their gesture demonstrated how the airport confrontation had actually amplified awareness of James's sacrifice and inspired others to show their support in meaningful ways. Michael remained at his post throughout the entire reception, occasionally adjusting the flag that covered James's casket and ensuring that military protocol was followed perfectly. He observed the interactions between the family and community with deep satisfaction, knowing that this outpouring of support would provide comfort to James's loved ones during their time of grief. The ceremony concluded with a final prayer, led by the airport chaplain, who had volunteered his services when he learned about the situation. Airport officials, including some who had initially supported Collins's position, now stood respectfully with bowed heads, recognizing the solemnity of the occasion they had nearly disrupted. As the family prepared to accompany their son's casket to the funeral home for the final services, Michael reflected on how the day's challenges had ultimately strengthened rather than diminished the honor paid to Private Thompson. The young soldier's homecoming had become a powerful reminder of the sacrifices made by military personnel and the debt owed to them by the communities they serve. The honor guard prepared for the final phase of their escort duty, knowing that their mission was nearly complete, but that the memory of this day would remain with them forever. Michael felt confident that he had fulfilled his promise to James and had upheld the traditions of the Queen's Guard, despite unexpected obstacles. The final journey from the airport to the funeral home became a community-wide demonstration of respect that exceeded everyone's expectations. Word of the airport confrontation and Michael's unwavering dedication had spread throughout the town, and people lined the streets to pay their respects as the funeral procession passed by. Local police officers, firefighters, and emergency personnel stood at attention at intersections, their vehicles creating an honor corridor. Michael rode in the lead vehicle, maintaining his vigilant watch over James even during the transport phase of the mission. Through the windows, he could see children holding handmade signs thanking fallen soldiers, elderly veterans saluting from wheelchairs, and families standing silently with hands over hearts. The airport crisis had inadvertently created awareness that brought an entire community together in remembrance. At the funeral home, the final transfer was conducted with flawless military precision. Michael personally supervised every aspect of the ceremony, from the positioning of the honor guard to the precise folding of the flag that would be presented to James's family. His attention to detail ensured that no element of military protocol was overlooked, providing the dignified closure that the young soldier deserved. As the flag was presented to James's mother, Michael spoke the traditional words of condolence, but his voice carried additional meaning after everything they had experienced together. The flag had covered her son during his journey from Afghanistan to his hometown, and now it would serve as a tangible symbol of his service and sacrifice. Her acceptance of the flag marked the completion of Michael's escort mission. The funeral home director, who had been following news reports of the airport situation, approached Michael privately to express his admiration for the Guard's dedication. He mentioned that several community organizations had already contacted him about establishing a permanent memorial to honor local military personnel. Inspired by the events of the day, local media coverage of the complete story, from the airport confrontation to the final ceremony, had generated significant public discussion about the treatment of military personnel and veterans. The initial negative publicity surrounding the security supervisor's actions had evolved into positive recognition of community support for fallen heroes and their families. In the days that followed, Michael received numerous letters and messages from people who had witnessed or heard about the airport incident. Many thanked him for his professionalism and dedication under difficult circumstances, while others shared their own stories of military service and loss. The overwhelming response reinforced his belief in the importance of military traditions and ceremonies. Security Supervisor Collins requested a transfer to a different department within the airport, recognizing that his inflexible approach to regulations had nearly caused significant harm to a grieving family. Airport management implemented new protocols, specifically addressing military funeral processions. To ensure that such conflicts would never occur again, Michael returned to his regular duties with the Queen's Guard. But the experience of escorting James home had changed him profoundly. He carried with him a deeper understanding of the connection between military service and civilian communities, and the responsibility that comes with wearing the uniform. Every ceremony he participated in afterward held additional meaning. The story of Private James Thompson's homecoming and the airport confrontation became a powerful example of how individual dedication and community support can overcome bureaucratic obstacles. Michael's unwavering commitment to honoring his fallen comrade had not only ensured James received proper recognition, but it also strengthened the bonds between military personnel and the communities they serve. Years later, when Michael was asked to speak at military ceremonies or veteran events, he would often tell James's story as a reminder that every fallen soldier deserves dignity and respect, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign soil, but in defense of the values and traditions that define military service. His escort mission had ended, but the honor he had shown Private James Thompson would continue inspiring others long into the future.